This movie is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real-life incidents, people, or animals is purely coincidental and unintentional. All characters and animals depicted are created by artificial intelligence. No real-life humans or animals were involved in the making of this movie. Any similarities to real individuals or animals are coincidental. This movie may contain disturbing scenes. Viewer discretion is advised, and parental guidance is recommended for viewers under 16.
That was his name. No reasons, but he was different from others, right from the childhood. Born under the shadow of the no moon night at 3 a.m., he looked stronger than others. His mother, in her fleeting tenderness, named him Ethan. Are some of us naturally cursed? The childhood and upcoming life of Ethan sparks this question in me. By the time he was 3, his mother succumbed to the sickness that clung to her since his birth. Some whispered it was him who had drained the last of her breath. His father remarried quickly, and his new wife saw Ethan as a baggage and treated him insensitively throughout. His shady skin and dirty look made him a target of teasing and cruelty by other children in the village and school. But cruelty has a way of festering in the quiet, and Ethan did not forget. By the time he reached 7th grade, the darkness in him began to surface. One afternoon, in a sudden burst of violence, he struck a boy so viciously that blood ran like a warning. When the teacher tried to stop him, Ethan turned on him too. The slap to the teacher led to his dismissal from the school. After that day, the school doors never opened for him again, and he didn't care either. Ethan became a solitary figure, drawn to the ominous loneliness of the cremation ground. It seemed to beckon him. He took a perverse pleasure in causing pain to the small creatures that wandered into his path. His eyes gleamed bright with a sinister intensity. Ethan had somehow clawed his way to adulthood, severing all ties with his family and home. Now he drifted from place to place as a day laborer, but his obnoxious, reckless behavior got him thrown out from everywhere within few days. Satisfaction was not made for him, and everyone near him felt an uneasy disturbance. He was kind of curse upon peace itself. One day, while working by the railway tracks, he noticed a train speeding toward a buffalo standing dumbly on the tracks. With wide eyes and a twisted blend of curiosity and fear, Ethan watched. The train ruthlessly tore through the helpless animal, shredding it into the pieces, and its blood splattered everywhere. For a brief moment, he covered his eyes, but when he uncovered them, a dark, primal satisfaction flooded his mind. Something in the carnage stirred him. The very next day, he returned to that spot, this time clutching a terrified, bleeding goat. The train's thunderous approach filled the air again. And this time, he knew exactly what he would do. As the train neared, he hurled the helpless creature into its deadly path. The horrified goat never touched the ground again, as the train sliced it midair, and its blood sprayed across Ethan's face. His lips curled into a wicked smile, which was twisted and vile. In that moment, drenched in blood, he understood what gave life its purpose. They say when you desire something with an unholy hunger, when your very soul craves for it, the forces of both darkness and light bend to your will. And so, Ethan secured a job with the railways, a job that led him straight to Island Station, the very heart of the railway network and state. Perhaps there are things not made by God, but forged in the infernal depths. And one of them was the new railway diesel engine, 13/13RL. Usually before an engine or any railway component is put into service, there's a tradition of appeasing the heavenly forces with rituals and prayers. However, the new chief engineer of this engine scoffed at such superstitions, dismissing them as relics of a bygone age. He ignored the advice against assigning the ominous number 13/13 to the engine, choosing it solely based on the machine number roster. When something is born of darkness, fate also seems to dance to its sinister tune. It seemed only fitting that Ethan was assigned as the driver of engine 13/13RL diesel. The sound of this engine's motor and siren was a cacophony of dread, far louder, more piercing, and more terrifying than any other locomotive. Most loco drivers refused to operate it, citing the lack of rituals and the ominous number. But Ethan, for reasons he himself couldn't explain, was drawn to its sinister allure. He examined the engine from all sides before stepping inside. There was something unnatural about this machine, a dark aura that seemed to emanate from its metal frame. All his life, Ethan had never felt close to anyone or anything. Not his family, not his home. But engine 13/13RL was different. A kindred spirit forged in the same infernal depths. Ethan set out on his first journey with the engine, pulling a goods train. Another driver named John was with him. The train had already covered 200 kilometers and had stopped at a red signal during the night. The time was 2:30 a.m. Ethan suggested they have a drink, and John agreed. Both took a shot of whiskey. And soon after, the train resumed its journey. As the signal shined yellow, they slowed down. At an unmanned crossing, a few people were still crossing the tracks, oblivious to the approaching train. Seeing this, Ethan's blood ran cold.
These lazy fools know the train is coming, and yet they're crossing. I'll teach them a lesson.
Snarled, taking another sip from his bottle and slamming the accelerator forward. John tried to stop him.
What are you doing? Dylan, you slow down. We got the yellow signal. People might get cut.
But Ethan's eyes glinting with a sinister hunger. The man crossing the tracks didn't stand a chance. The train usually passed the signal slowly, so the man hadn't expected the impending doom approach him so quickly. His body, a twisted, mangled heap of meat, lay sprawled across the tracks, a gruesome testament to Ethan's cruelty. John, his stomach churning with horror, said,
You did that on purpose! You killed that man! We were supposed to slow down! Yellow, not green!
Ethan, his rage a tempest within, replied,
The only way to teach these people a lesson is...
The two sat in silence for a while, the air thick with the stench of death. Ethan broke the silence and warned John.
Look, John, if you tell anyone about this, we'll both lose a job. So think over it.
They continued in silence until they reached their destination. Both drivers moved to the front of 13/13RL. The wheels were still drenched with blood, bits of flesh clinging to them. John vomits at the sight, but Ethan, a sinister smile playing on his lips, grabbed a pressure hose and began to wash away the blood and flesh. hulking engine 13/13RL resting in the darkness of the loco shed, Ethan returned, his mind still gripped by the unexplainable bond he felt with the machine. He climbed up into the driver area. His movements was jerky and erratic. With a twist of the key, the engine roared and its siren howling like a shriek sound. It waked the shed keeper up, his face contorted in alarm.
Ethan, what the hell are you doing here?
Ethan, his eyes wild and unfocused, didn't respond. He was lost in the unknown bond between him and 13/13's RL. Shed keeper was louder this time.
Get out of there, you maniac! Get out of there!
The keeper yelled, irritation rising in his voice. This time, Ethan's devil eyes looked at him. Ethan stepped forward, the blade of a knife flashing in the dim light. In the flash of time, Ethan pressed it against the keeper's throat, cold and unforgiving.
Say that again, you scoundrel, and I'll carve you up right here, kid. No one will ever find pity says.
The keeper's eyes widened with terror. His words were swallowed by fear, a strangled apology escaping his lips.
Sorry, Aiden. I'll take a minute.
Ethan smiled sinisterly and withdrew the knife. As Ethan went away with gulp from bottle, the silence in the shed was broken only by the eerie hum of the engine and the faint sound of the keeper's trembling. Ethan, the sinister partner of engine 13/13RL, ran the train like a monstrous automaton. While he adhered to the schedule and diligence, his heart held a sinister rhythm as well. Whenever an oblivious soul dared to cross his tracks, he would press the accelerator to surge the speed, which left many clinging to life by a thin margin. Although animals were less fortunate and were torn apart by the merciless wheels, there remains a bloody testament to its power. Ethan found a perverse satisfaction in the carnage, enjoying the grisly work of cleaning up the remains of blood and flesh from the wheels. John, a silent witness to these atrocities, dared not to challenge the monster. Technically, Ethan was within limits of railway regulations. Trains were not bound to halt or slow down for stray animals or foolish pedestrians. Yet most drivers used to keep the throttle low, while no-man crossings in residential area, for the sake of humanity and compassion towards pedestrians, Ethan reveled in his cruelty. His reign of terror remained unchallenged, his dark pleasure fueling his desire to drive engine 13/13RL, a grim chariot of death. But Ethan's evil was destined to reach its zenith eventually. One morning, shrouded in the pre-dawn darkness at 5:30 a.m., Ethan dragged engine 13/13RL and coupled it to a freight train. Fate had aligned, for John wasn't there to intervene because of illness. Ethan had spent the night sloshing in alcohol, and the train was a beast of steel, tearing through the dark with reckless speed and piercing siren. The streets were almost deserted, and all signals flashed green. Just as the first sight of dawn were beginning to lit up the sky, two innocent children, their laughter echoing through the quiet streets, were crossing the railway tracks on their way to school. In a residential area, the signal would normally sign yellow, which means minimum speed. But Ethan, engrossed with a sinister fury, saw only an opportunity to satisfy it. Instead of slowing down, he mercilessly accelerated, and his heart pounding for a dark satisfaction. The children, unaware of the oncoming doom, remained lost in their world, not realizing the danger until it was far too late. Ethan blew the siren, but by then, eerie fate had already sealed its grip. Their startled cries pierced the air, but Ethan, his heart remained unmoved. Horrified witnesses could only watch helplessly. As the tragedy unfolded, they hurried towards the train to witness further haunting scene, while the children's parents also arrived and their hearts pounding with dread. The train didn't stop. It roared forward until one child's small body became lodged in the brake pipe. forcing Ethan to pull the emergency brakes. The grinding of the metal echoed ominously as the train screeched to a halt, but it was too late. The scene that greeted the poor parents was a nightmare beyond words. The children's fragile bodies were broken, tangled in the wheels, limbs twisted in unnatural positions. One child's head had been turned too far, his face eerily twisted in a look of pure terror. The father, shaking with disbelief, slowly approached his child. But as he tried to pull the body free, the head separated from the unlucky child's body and came out loose in father's shaking hands, which frees him and others in disbelief. His hands went cold, trembling as the mother's anguished scream cut through the silence. She fell to the ground, clutching the lifeless head to her chest, her sobs filling the air like the echo of a terrible dream from which there was no waking. As the crowd's fury turned toward Ethan, they spotted him leaning casually against the engine's door, lazily smoking a beanie. Someone howled, their voice rising above the chaos.
That murderer! He didn't stop! Get him!
But the enraged crowd surged forward, desperation and rage boiling over. In a swift motion, Ethan showed off his knife, piercing it deep into a man's stomach. The man's eyes widened in disbelief, a choked gasp escaping his lips as he collapsed to the ground, blood pouring around him. Panic erupted and the crowd scattered, horrified by the sudden brutality. Ethan put 13/13's RL to life again and pushed the accelerators, but escape was impossible. Someone lit a cloth with fire and hurled it toward the engine, igniting a blaze. Others joined in, throwing more flames to the motor and fuel tank of 1313 RL. And soon the air was thick, and an intensified blaze of fire became a ravenous beast. Though Ethan had a chance to escape the inferno, but he stood frozen, the flames licking at his skin. As the fire devoured him, he screamed in agony. The sound was a chilling blend of terror and fury, but even in his final moments, his face twisted into a mask of rage and hatred. When the police finally arrived and extinguished the fire, the inferno had already taken its toll. Although engine 13/13RL still stood intact, but Ethan finally reached to deserved destiny by a horrifying means, a wraith of ash. His face twisted into a nightmarish mask of rage. His hands clenched around the steering wheel with such strength that it took considerable effort to free them. Though Ethan was gone, his dark legacy lingered in the air, a haunting reminder that the story was far from over. The news reached the railway division, and senior officials, including the divisional railway manager of Ireland, arrived at the scene. Engine 13/13RL was towed to a separate platform. Ethan's charred body was also brought. Even in death, his half-burnt, angry face looked more terrifying than ever. This felt ominous, a terrible sign. Everyone stood frozen in fear. That same day, Ethan was cremated, but no one from his family attended. A meeting was soon called, and the air was heavy with tension. John broke the silence, saying,
"This is all happening because the engine wasn't worshipped."
The engineer retorted,
"Nonsense. No one will talk rubbish. This accident happened due to the driver's negligence. Assistant engineer, get the engine repaired immediately."
Under the assistant engineer's supervision, 3 workers began trying to repair engine 13/13RL. 2 of them worked in front of the engine, while one crawled underneath to work. As they were busy with the repairs, suddenly, the engine started up on its own. The workers in front were taken aback, surprisingly. The worker underneath, Jakob, half emerged and asked,
Did any of you fire the engine?
By then, the assistant engineer arrived after hearing the roar of engine.
What happened? Is the engine fixed?
No idea, sir. We were still working when it suddenly started.
A loud siren blared from the engine. The assistant engineer stepped forward to inspect the engine, only to be astounded by what he witnessed. The siren was blaring on its own. Nothing made sense. He yelled,
"Move out of the way, quickly!"
But before anyone could react, the engine lurched forward. Jakob, still trapped halfway underneath, felt a wave of panic wash over him as he struggled to escape. But the engine mercilessly sliced through his abdomen, cutting him in half. The assistant engineer leaped onto the engine quickly, desperately trying to slam on the brakes. But 1313RL roared on without a care. Michael, another worker, was sent sprawling, his body violently decapitated by the relentless machine. Meanwhile, Marcus fell onto the track straight, and he fearfully saw engine cruelly shearing over him, splitting him in two from the middle of his legs. Only then did the engine finally come to a halt, leaving behind a scene of horrific carnage. 3 workers gruesomely crushed beneath its merciless and sinister wheels. Hearing the commotion, the DRM, Divisional Railway Manager, the chief engineer, and others rushed to the scene. They found the assistant engineer in the cab and his hands on driving gear of the engine. Everyone assumed he had moved the engine, and the police arrested him. He screamed, insisting that the engine moved on its own, that he hadn't done anything, but no one believed him. It was a horrific scene. Even after being torn apart, the 3 workers were alive for a short while, writhing in agony before finally silence of death engrossed them. The other workers, terrified, collectively told the engineer,
Sir, say whatever you want, but none of us will operate 1313RL anymore, even at the peril of suspension or dismissal.
After so many accidents, the chief engineer had nothing left to convince the worker. He finally sighed and said,
All right. Take the engine to the waste shed. It won't be used anymore.
The waste shed was a lonely scrapyard for the railway, a resting place for unusable parts. Night had fallen, casting eerie shadows over the yard. The master driver started the engine, steering it slowly towards the waste shed. It was tucked away lonely at the far end of the yard, with tracks leading to both the workshop and the waste shed, allowing engines to be moved as needed. When he stopped in front of the shed's gate, a chill ran down his spine as he climbed down. The gate loomed directly in front of 13/13RL, dark and foreboding. Diesel engines, especially large ones, looked terrifying from the front, and 1313RL looked even more sinister, especially after having killed so many innocent lives. Its partially burnt frame made it even more menacing. The master driver, trembling with fear, wondered if he should proceed or not, as he needed to go in front of the engine to unlock the gate. After hesitating for a couple of minutes, he cautiously stepped forward and began unlocking the gate, all the while scared that the engine might suddenly move and crush him in pieces. His hands shook so much that the key slipped from his hand and fell to the ground. Though it was dark, as he bent down to grab the key, his eyes fell on 13/13RL's massive wheels, which mercilessly slaughtered several lives. His breath caught in his throat, but mustering all his courage, he began reciting the Hanuman Chalisa under his breath. Slowly, his courage returned, and he climbed back onto the cab, guiding 1313RL into the shed. All the while, he kept muttering the Hanuman Chalisa as he drove it forward. Inside the pitch-black waste shed, only the headlight of 13/13RL was glaring. The master carefully maneuvered the engine to the farthest corner of the shed, stopping just before it hit the wall. He quickly deactivated the engine's week, everything was normal. But a week later, something happened. A woman was traveling on a local train from Crownland to Islay late at night. It was almost midnight, and her compartment was nearly empty, except for 3 goons who were eyeing her menacingly. When the train reached Destiny around 11:30 p.m., the woman disembarked and the 3 men followed her. She began to walk faster, then broke into a run, terrified. In her panic, she ran into the lonely waste shed. The shed's door was open because 2 workers were inside drinking alcohol. It would regularly happen that some workers would sneak in after stealing the shed's key, as no one really came there often. The woman, panting with fear, ran to the farthest corner of the shed, where ominous 1313RL was parked, and hid right in front of a monstrous machine. The men searched for her, but when they couldn't find her, they eventually left. The woman stayed hidden for a while longer, her heart pounding. The 2 workers who had finished their drinks started leaving, not knowing that anyone had entered. The woman stood frozen in front of the engine, trapped between 1313RL and the wall, barely a few inches separating her from the massive iron. When she looked up, she realized she was standing directly in front of the engine, and it loomed over her like a monster. For a few moments, she stared at it in terror. Just then, she heard the gate lock and snapped out of her trance. She tried to escape, but just as she was about to slip away, the wheels of 1313RL began to move. Her blood ran cold. She tried to escape faster and nearly made it out, but her wrist got caught between the front of the engine and the wall, and one of the wheels rolled over her foot. She let out a blood-curdling scream, but the noise of a passing train and its blaring siren drowned her out. One of the workers, while locking the gate, paused. He thought he heard something. The other worker had already moved ahead, but he called out,
"Hey, I think someone's in there."
No way. You're hearing things. Who'd be inside?
But the first worker couldn't shake the feeling and decided to check. The moment he stepped in, a scream cut through the silence, sharp and unmistakable. His heart raced as he ran toward the sound. Shining his torch, horror struck him. 1313RL had pinned a woman against the wall. Her right wrist and part of her leg were trapped under the engine, though. The wheel hadn't fully crushed her leg yet. Terrified, the worker froze, unable to summon the courage to help the woman. Panic surged through him, and instead of acting, he bolted outside, screaming for his friend, who had already reached the platform. Still in shock, he shouted, "Hey!" His words tumbled out in a frenzy, and in his fear, he didn't realize he was running directly on the tracks. The Super Express was thundering toward him from behind. His friend's voice rang out, desperate, but it was too late. The train slammed into him, and in an instant, his life was taken, his body brutally torn apart. The next morning, the DRM was informed. He arrived and berated the workers and the station master.
"Is there anything useful in the waste shed?"
No, sir. It's all junk. Anything useful is kept in the workshop,
replied the station master. The DRM ordered,
"Lock it up in front of me, and if anyone tries to enter, they'll be dismissed on the spot."
The entire incident was unfolding right in front of the waste shed's gate, and inside, the woman was still alive barely. Pain coursed through her body, threatening to drag her into unconsciousness. The sharp click of the lock jolted her awake, and with all the strength she had left, she writhed in agony. A scream tore from her throat, but she was too far back, trapped at the rear of the shed, too weak to scream loud out of her dried throat. Her desperate cries were swallowed by the roaring machines in the workshop next to the waste shed, drowning any chance of being heard. Helpless, she watched through blurred eyes as the gate was locked, sealing her fate. One by one, everyone left, oblivious to her fading pleas, leaving her completely alone, lost, trapped in the suffocating, sinister silence with no hopes of help at all.